Okay. Persons, souls, and natures. So this is getting into one of the more applied areas of metaphysics. Okay, remember what right before the lecture before this, we talked about the is in those four sentences, right? Socrates is human, Socrates is white, Socrates is the teacher of Plato, and Socrates is skin and bone. Okay, all of these are kind of, there seems to be attributes of Socrates, but there's kind of something deeper about who Socrates is rather than just his attributes. And that's where we start talking about persons, okay? Persons, and then souls, and then natures. These are all different things, and hopefully I'm going to help you start sorting them out. This will also help you understand who you are as a living being, okay? So again, just like that conversation we just had about Halloween, right? I mean, some of you just was like, we just spent 30 minutes on that. True. But again, tomorrow's Halloween, so it seemed appropriate. But also, it helps us understand the world we live in. I mean, what could be bad about that, right? If you more thoroughly understand the world you live in, you can more thoroughly participate in it and change it if you want to, if you feel like it needs changing.
Oh, it needs changing.
Okay? So the same thing with this, right? The more thoroughly you understand, this literally is who you are, okay? The more thoroughly you understand it, the more thoroughly you understand yourself and can participate in that, okay? Can live a little more vibrant life or change it if it needs changing. Okay, but first you got to understand some stuff before you just start changing stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, so just take, if you're like, why are we talking about this? Just take a step back, okay? Work with me. Okay, so let's ask, what is a person first? This is, now listen, we're going to throw out a lot of words, and you're going to be like, what the heck does that mean? And we're going to have to like throw them out there and then define them. So just hang on, right? Just suspend your questions for a second, and because we'll get back to it. Because when I say a person is an individual instance of a nature, you're going to go, what's a nature? I know, we're going to get to that. Okay, so just hang on. A person is an individual instance of a nature. Okay? There are different types of natures. I'll just put it out there. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, a person also has the appropriate, to whatever it is, okay, appropriately complex mental capacities. So this could be not very complex to super complex, depending on what type of person we're talking about. Okay, depending on, I don't mean just humans, but depending on what nature we have an individual instance of, will determine how appropriately complex your mental capacities should be. So in other words, a dog's mental capacities are complex. They're appropriately complex for a dog, right? Not for a human. Humans are going to have a little more complex. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. They must have capacity to achieve, but not necessarily the ability. This will help us understand when we get to questions like, okay, is a person, a human, in a vegetative state? Okay. Are they a person? Well, yes, because they do have the capacity for those appropriately complex mental tasks. They just don't have the ability right now because of other things that have happened. Does that make sense? Okay? So it's not like they turn into not a person, right? It's still there. The capacity's there. They just don't have the ability. Okay? So my 4-year-old, right? Okay? He has the capacity. He just doesn't have the ability right now. Make sense? He's going to grow in his abilities. Okay? Okay. Okay. Let's talk about these mental capacities. What exactly are they? Okay? First, consciousness. Not conscience, but consciousness. Okay? Consciousness. Consciousness involves sensation, thought, belief, desire, and volition. Okay? Volition means, it's another word to substitute would be will. Okay? Volition is that thing that takes your sensations, thoughts, beliefs, desires. Your thought may be, I want to do something about that. Volition is the thing that gets up and gets it done. Initiates action. Okay? So consciousness, volition is a part of consciousness. Volition is that thing that makes you go, let's do this thing. Right? You might have, because you know this, you might have the desire and the thought of, I want to do this, but you don't do it. Right? Yeah, volition would be, he saw, like his sensation, heard and saw that water bottle fall or whatever, He thought, that needs to be picked up. He has the belief that he could pick it up and then it wouldn't be too disrupting to the class. He has the desire, yeah, I can do that. I want to do that. That'd be a good thing for me to do. And then he actually did it. That's his volition. Okay? That's all involved in consciousness. So now we know, yes, Van is conscious. Okay? Also, Van also hopefully has self-consciousness. Notice this is different, right? The moment he takes all those things and turns them inward to do something like thinking about his thinking, now he has self-consciousness. Van knows that he is Van and not somebody else, I hope, right? Van knows some things about himself that makes him himself. He can look inside and say things like, I feel tired, or my brain is awesome, or, right? My thoughts are really clicking today. Okay, he can assess himself. He knows the I in there. He knows the me in there. Okay? That's self-consciousness. So, mental capacities include consciousness and self-consciousness. We good so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, mental capacities include relationality. Relationality. Okay? That means your mental capacities interacting with someone else's mental capacities. Okay? Your ability to relate, your ability to interact with another center of consciousness. Now look, all of these, could we say that a dog has consciousness, self-consciousness, and relationality?
No.
Somewhat.
No, somewhat.
Not to the extent that humans do.
Okay, good. That's exactly right. Not to the extent that humans do. There's a lot of debate about the self-consciousness part. It's kind of hard to tell, you know what I mean? But probably a dog doesn't, because dogs don't improve really their behavior. They haven't changed a lot. Okay, we talked about this way at the beginning, right? Then probably they're not thinking about their thinking, which means they don't really have a self-consciousness, but they do have relationality, right, with humans and other dogs and other animals, okay? And they do have sensations. They probably do have thoughts. They probably we know they have desires and volition, right? They go and get stuff done, but it's not the same as ours. That means it's appropriately complex for a dog, but it's not appropriately complex for a human. Okay? So they're still there. They're just at different scales of complexity. Okay? Okay. Let's talk about a nature. Okay? If a person is an individual instance of a nature, then what's a nature? Okay? Here we go.
Whoa.
Yeah. Hey, okay, hang on. Conduct an experiment with me, okay? Don't write, just listen and think through it, and then write it down when you feel like you understand it, kind of. At least kind of, okay? It'll help it stick in your brain a little better. Okay, so look, a nature is the property that includes all properties that are essential to an individual's being a member of a certain kind. That is, another way to say it, all properties that are necessary for a thing to be what it is. So look around the room. We've got a bunch of humans in here. Okay? A bunch of humans in here. Do we all look different? Are we from different places? Are we different genders? Are we, right? Different ethnicities, okay? Different backgrounds, right? All lots of factors, probably more that's different about us than makes us the same, right? Except for one big thing. We're all human. So what are the characteristics that make us all human? What are characteristics of being human? And then we've got all these other characteristics that can evidently vary, right? Because we've got different heights and weights and all sorts of stuff, right? Different intelligences, okay? Just in this room. And yet we would say that we're all human. So we must possess similar characteristics, right, that belong to the category of being human. And we all possess all of those because we're all human. Does that make sense? That's a nature. That set of characteristics is a nature. Okay, it's unchanging among individual instances, and that's what makes you human. Okay? Then there's all sorts of other characteristics that can vary all over the place, right? But every one of us retains those characteristics that makes us human. Okay? Does that make sense? That's a nature. Okay. Need a minute to write it down? That's what that says, basically. But it's a property that includes all properties that are essential to a thing being of a certain kind. Okay, so you are human. So what's that? What's those characteristics that are essential to being human? Okay.
One would be basic anatomy.
Anatomy.
Like we all got, brains and arms and legs.
Okay.
We all look like.
What about somebody that doesn't have any arms and legs?
Oh, okay. Well,
They're not human.
well,
That sounds really bad. Calling them
Being a mammal.
non-human.
Oh,
Okay, mammal maybe. We wouldn't call that person a mammal, but being a mammal is essential to being a human.
we're all Homo sapiens.
Which is another way of saying human.
Yeah. It's a scientific way.
Okay. This is, and we'll talk about this, this is another one of those words we'll talk about, okay? This is a universal property. Okay, a universal property. A universal property means that in all of the instances it's being applied in, it doesn't change. Okay, so look at like how different me and Tabitha are, and Janice. Okay, the three of us are really different. We look different, we sound different, we probably think different, we've had really different experiences in our life, but we're all now listen, we're all human, but even more importantly, we're all equally human. Right? Not one of us is less human than the other one is. Does that make sense to you? Okay? That means we all possess exactly the same characteristics that make us human in exactly the same quantities, which means that that characteristic, that package of being human, humanness, must be able to be applied to everybody that's a human. Right? It's the same for everybody.
so no one can be better or worse at being a human than someone else.
Correct. Correct. Although I will tell you multiple times in this class, be good at being a human, right? Which basically means participate fully in your life. Okay, be awake. Okay. Okay, but I mean, you look at every instance of a human that we have here. Okay, they're all equally human. So that must mean that whatever this means to be human must be something that's able to be replicated, able to be applied across the board. Okay, it's not like we have to adjust it every time. Does that make sense? It's a quality like red. Okay, it could be applied to many things at one time. Okay, we could all be wearing a red shirt in here. We can all be wearing the exact same red shirt, not one shirt, because that would be weird. But like, right?
Cool.
But do you see how more than one thing can be red at one time? Because red is a property, we're going to talk about this. Red is a universal property, okay? Human nature is a universal property. It can be applied to more than one thing at one time. Okay?
So dog nature would be a universal property.
Sure.
Dogs. Okay.
Sure. Good. Okay? Also, it's prior to the person. Okay? It must have been prior to the person means it must be there, okay, back here, and then human. 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 Okay? So when a human comes into existence, it's not like they create this human nature, right? The nature is prior. It's already there, and then we have instance of a nature, instance of a nature, instance of a nature, instance of a nature. Does that make sense?
So is all nature one nature?
Is it? That's a good question.
No, I don't get it. Prior to person.
Okay, what that means is, it just means that when you have an instance of a nature, like here, 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 right? These are 4 instances of a human nature, meaning the nature remains unchanged, but you have it here, and you have it here, and you have it here, and you have it here.
Nature imparts
So it's
human.
already here, right? And then you have human, human, human. Does that make sense? Your children, your children's children, okay? They'll all be human nature.
Okay. Okay, get it.
Okay? Yeah, don't overthink it. It's not
I
that
think
hard.
I understand.
So your nature makes you the same, like, on first level, I'd say, but second.
Way down deep, yeah.
And then, like, the next would be, like, what makes you you? That's what's going
Okay?
to make the difference in
Good.
how you see.
Good. Yeah, remember at the beginning we're talking about categorical analysis, right? We went all the way from like living things all the way down to my dog Blondie, right? That's what we're talking about. This is the category of human nature we're talking about right now. Actually, we're just talking about natures in general, not just human natures. Okay? Okay. But remember when we say prior to the person, we're talking about persons, right? What we just talked about, okay? Now I'm gonna, little spoiler alert, I don't think there are just human persons. I think there are other kinds of persons. Okay? But whatever type of person we're talking about, the nature comes before the person, because a person is an individual instance of a nature. Okay? So all persons have natures. Because remember, we've got the nature and then person, 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 person. Okay? So all persons have natures. You can't have a person without a nature. Okay? You can't have a denatured person. It doesn't work that way. That's what part of what it means to be prior, right? There's a nature, and then all persons come after that and out of that. Okay? There's no denatured persons. That makes a little more sense? Kind of.
So a person can be like what you have been molded out of, like society, or like what you've been made into?
No, a little more basic than that. Remember, persons, we just talked about persons, are individual instances of natures with appropriately complex mental capacities. That's basic definition of what a person is. Now, who you are is based a lot off of how you were raised and right experiences you've had. But you as a kind, you as a thing, if you will, right,
Also just the person.
is a person. Yeah. Yeah, in specific, a human person, which means you're an individual instance of a human nature. Okay? Yep, we already talked about, it just says a person is an individual instance of a nature. Right, I said that. Okay, one, we'll go through this slide and then we'll be done, okay? So types of natures. Each nature is unique to itself, but not all natures allow for persons. Okay, there are different types of natures, but not all natures allow for persons. In other words, when we have an individual instance of a nature, that's not always called a person. It is when we're talking about an individual instance of a human nature, okay, but not an individual instance of an animal nature, for example. We don't call those persons, okay? So non-personal natures, right? Natures where we have individual instances of natures, but we don't call them persons, okay, are plants and animals. Okay? There is something, right? You take a tree, you take a tiny flower, you take some kind of medicinal plant, right? You take a cactus, okay? All of those things are going to have something that's going to make you go, that's a plant of some kind, right? Even though sometimes we say, no, it's not a plant, it's a tree, okay? Or no, it's not a tree, it's a plant, whatever, okay? It's in that category, kind of like all humans are in that category, right? In other words, they're different from humans and they're different from animals. Okay? Growing things, whatever you want to call that, that's its own category. Okay? That's its own nature. Okay? So every time that we have a plant or a tree, we have instances of a plant nature. It's plantness, plantnicity being produced, being shown. Okay?
So nature's like the background for life.
Kind of, yeah. Every time we have an animal, any animal, right? You take ticks all the way up to, I don't know, elephants, rhino. We saw a rhino last weekend, or a couple weekends ago, at the zoo. It's pretty huge. Very, very huge.
So if you believe in like a god or whatever religion, is nature over or under?
Over or under God?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll talk about it here in a second. Yeah, it's a good question. That's a very good question. Okay, but do you see, like any type of animal, you can still separate, no matter what animal it is, even if they're not even close to the same family, you can still separate them out as animal and not plant and not human. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Whatever that thing is that makes you go, oh yeah, they're different, that's a nature. Okay? And what it actually is, like we said, is a set of characteristics. You just might not know what those are, but you see that they're different.
The nature of a plant, the nature of a person, the nature of like,
Animals,
yeah.
are all different. Those are three different natures. Yeah. Now, plants and animals do not, when we see individual instances of them, but we don't call them persons, okay? They don't produce persons. Why? Because persons are individual instances with appropriately complex mental capacities, okay? So the mental capacities of dogs or rhinos, okay, are not complex enough for us to call them persons. Okay? Plants, are not aware of any mental capacities of plants. At least not that I know of. Okay? Okay. Universally accepted personal natures, right? Natures that produce persons, humans. Okay? Every time we see a human, we see a person. Okay? Some that are not as accepted or controversial are angelic natures and divine natures. Okay? Depending on your beliefs and your convictions in other areas, this is going to allow you to either accept or deny the presence of, if you think that there are angels, then those are going to be different from humans. Okay? Different from humans. And they're also not God. That's why we don't call them God. We call them angels, right? And so they're going to be different from a divine nature as well. Okay? Depending on what you think about the nature of God, right? Whatever he, she, or it is like. This may be one person. It may be three persons. It may be not a person. Okay? It may be more of a force or an energy. Okay? So it just kind of depends on what, this is where religions make claims about that, right? So it kind of depends on where the evidence lies on what you adopt. But to answer your question from before, this nature is still prior to, it wouldn't be accurate to say above or below. It's prior, logically and temporally prior to the person. Okay? So, 3 different types of natures as far as personal natures: humans, and then possibly divine, possibly angelic. Okay, stop. Whew. Good times. Good times. 3x5 cards if you've got them. I passed around a sign-in sheet. And make sure you get your journal if you haven't yet.
I found this note card too. I don't know if I turned it in or what, but I found it in the bottom of my backpack. So I'm gonna turn it in.
Okay. I'll look for it.
That's not like me at all. To not say something.
Yeah, the surprise.